stuff we use year-round in Houston. Air conditioning.
You guys getting some cool air back there?
Yep.
We use our grills.
All right, dinner's almost ready.
And yet we definitely always use our common sense.
Trying to make a program that would have common sense.
Common sense isn't so common.
No, it just makes so much sense.
So right now, join lifelong Houstonian Bill King as we take on the issues with a little bit of Houston common sense.
Common sense.
It's time for common sense.
This is Common Sense with Bill King. Here's Bill.
Hey, Houston, welcome to Common Sense Talk Radio on a very dusty Saturday afternoon. Really excited about today's show. We're going to be talking about crime trends in Houston, and I've got two real experts here. One, we've got Ray Hunt. Ray is a 30-year-plus veteran of HPD. He is the immediate past president of the Houston Police Officers Union and has been very actively involved in all sorts of law enforcement issues for many years, obviously, given that. The other is Andy Kahan. Andy's currently the director of Victim Services at Crime Stoppers, but before that, he was a victim advocate for the city of Houston for many years and also has a background in law enforcement. Ray and Andy, welcome so much to Common Sense Talk Radio.
Thank you, Bill.
Hey, great to be here.
I want to start out and kind of give our folks a perspective on where you all see crime in Houston today versus kind of where it's been in the past. And Andy, I know you follow these numbers. Tell us what you see going on out there right now.
Sadly, I see a rise, and particularly in violent crimes, and particularly crimes that are affecting individuals such as murder, aggravated robbery, aggravated assault. And I can tell you from someone who's been watching the trends ever since probably around 2020, the numbers have increasingly rised up. And a lot of it is because we have thousands of offenders, defendants, whatever you want to call them as vernacular, that have been continuously released, often on multiple felony bonds, back to the community, and they do what they do best and continue to affect us. So it's a sad thing. And what we're seeing right now, if you saw in today's Houston Chronicle, now felony district court judges are also trying to release so-called nonviolent felons on PR bonds, kind of piggybacking on the federal misdemeanor bond reform.
Ray, what are your officers seeing out there on the street these days?
Definitely an increase in violent crime, definitely an increase in robberies, murders, aggravated assaults, like Andy said. And sadly, I think it's going to do nothing more than continue to increase. I'll say that because what Andy touched on, we're about to have felons who are going to be released on PR bonds. And we're not talking about first-time felons. We're talking about felons who have 5, 10, 15, sometimes 50 convictions. And folks like Rodney Ellis, who's made it very clear that if you're not convicted, you should not be sitting in jail on a bond. I agree with that on a first-time offender, but not on somebody who's got 15, 20 prior convictions. That's what that person does for a living, and that person needs to get out in order to go out there and rob somebody else to get more money. So I'm telling you, these numbers are going to continue to increase. Our officers are probably going to be less likely to get involved in situations where they're going to have to do proactive policing, which means that crime is going to increase. I have no doubt about it.
So I'm going to come back to bail reform here in a few minutes and talk about that in some more detail. But just talking about the numbers for a second. We had many years that crime declined in the United States and in Houston, but it looks like around 2013 or so, those numbers started tracking back up, and they've been ticking up pretty consistently. But, Ray, we've had this really remarkable increase in aggravated assaults really just in the last 6 months. It's more than doubled. Do you have any explanation for that?
I think it's been a perfect storm. With COVID, you had people who've been stuck in apartments or houses and with the same people over and over, and they're very frustrated with the fact that they can't get out and do what they normally do. And I just think it's just ripe for more violence. And as these numbers continue to increase, I think the crime's going to continue to skyrocket. I think COVID has a lot to do with it.
Can you explain what's the difference? There's simple assaults and there's aggravated assault. The simple assaults have not gone up that much, but the aggravated assaults have really gone up dramatically. Can you tell our audience what's the difference between a simple and an aggravated assault?
If somebody just pushes you and it doesn't cause any injury, that's just a Class C assault. That's something equal to a traffic ticket. If somebody hits you and causes bodily injury or pain, that's a Class A assault, which could result in time in jail. And then if you got aggravated, that's something to do with if a firearm's involved, or if it's someone like you in it's an elderly person, then it's,
yeah. So y'all,
I'm in that category.
Yeah, everybody leave me
so.
alone out there.
That it becomes aggravated, or if a gun's involved, a knife's involved, anything like that, that automatically makes it aggravated. And anything aggravated is a felony, which means it could result in prison time. Unfortunately, in Harris County, it's probably not going to result in prison time.
What about family violence? Are those normally charged as simple or aggravated assaults?
Those are normally Class A assaults, which is a county charge, but again, you're getting PR bonds on those as well. And so if the person's not at least put in jail long enough for in most cases, the female to be able to pack her things up and leave, so that whenever he gets out and comes back over, he doesn't assault her again. It's just it's a bad situation.
If the person that's the victim in that case is seriously injured, would it be charged as an aggravated assault?
Absolutely. Anything with serious bodily injury is automatically aggravated.
I can tell you from looking at the daily bookings when COVID-19 first started, like Ray said, the amount of people being booked in and released on PR bonds and incredibly low bonds, the offense to me that stood out was aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and family violence. Those two categories I was looking at were released more often on PR bonds than any other violent offense.
And remember, Bill, when these people are released on PR bonds in Harris County, in many, many cases, if not most, they're not showing up whenever they promise to show up.
Yeah.
The whole point of having a bondsman out there is to make sure that person calls you the day before and says, "Hey, you
Some
will
help
be in
in
court."
making sure they get back to court.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but these judges fudge the numbers to make sure that they just reset the case instead of say that the person didn't show up, because if they show that their PR is not working.
If there's a silver lining to the COVID, it's that certain crimes are way down. I saw where robberies are way down, burglaries are way down.
Well, your DWIs at first was way down because nobody was out drinking and driving.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And theft from automobiles, which, I was just sort of stunned. We've got this new crime data, which the city HPD is putting out, which I'm really excited to see. And I saw last year we had 33,000 break-ins into cars, which is the first time I've ever seen that number. That's like almost 100 a day. It's kind of stunning.
I promise you, your listeners right now are shaking their heads thinking back to when they walked out of their store and they found their window broken and the stuff taken out of their car. Let me tell you why this is the case in Harris County. The reason for it is in Harris County, a burglary of a motor vehicle is nothing to this district attorney. Mm-hmm. Let me just give you a few stats here. The first 10 people arrested and charged with burglary in Harris County this year. Harris County, the first one had 4.
Okay, wait. We don't have time. I'm going to come back right after the break and pick that up. But I'll tell you one thing. I know that number is understated because, I had somebody try to break into my car.
You didn't report it.
I didn't even think about calling and reporting. So there's really no telling how many of those there really are out there. Okay, we got to take a little break here, folks. We'll be right back with more from Ray and Andy on crime in Houston and the current trends on Common Sense Talk Radio. Hey, we're back with more Common Sense Talk Radio. This is Bill King. I'm here with Andy Kahan of Crime Stoppers and Ray Hunt of HPOU. I forgot to mention, Ray, that you brought me an HPD camouflage cap here, so you people on Facebook Live can see. I think I look pretty fashionable in that. I'm going to have to save that for later. Yeah. So let's talk about bail reform a little bit. Both of you all have opened up the topic already, and obviously it's a hot topic. And I don't think there's anybody that wants people sitting in jail because they can't make bond on, trivial offenses. And that's certainly, there's some people in this county, they're advocating that's what's been going on and that needs to be reformed. Can you just tell me what y'all's perspective is on it? And Andy, let's start with you.
Yeah.
What was the situation before? What is it now? Did something need to be done? Have we gone too far? Just what is your view?
I can tell you, Crime Stoppers, and be perfectly clear, we do support misdemeanor bond reform, and we recognize the need for criminal justice reform. What we don't support is when public safety, and that's happening, is being placed at a higher risk when career habitual offenders are continuously being released back to the community despite being charged with multiple crimes. I looked at a case that we put out a reward for, and I said, geez, that sounds familiar, because we put out a reward for him 6 months ago and paid on it, and now we're putting the same guy back out there. I took a look, Bill, and I was absolutely stunned. I went back, and there were 25 people and 25 citizens of Harris County who have been murdered since January of 2019 by defendants released on multiple felony bonds. I was astounded. And I'll just give you a couple examples. Daniel Musterman, who's in a Walmart parking lot.
Before you do that,
Yeah.
I want to emphasize and make sure that the listeners out there heard exactly what Andy said. So in the last year and a half,
Correct.
we've had 25 Harris County citizens murdered by people that had been released on PR bonds. Is that
Not just PR bonds, but on multiple bonds.
Multiple
a combination.
bonds.
This
Okay.
isn't like you were out on bond and now you're being accused. These are people who've been out on bond, rearrested, charged with a new felony, put back on bond, and continuously. Right. That's what drives me up the wall. I always grew up of the perspective, and Ray, you'll probably agree, back in the days, there was one bond per customer. You were given a bond, and if you were arrested and charged with a new crime, you pretty much said to everybody, I'm not going to abide by anything.
Condition of bonds.
One bond per customer.
All right, go back and tell us some of the stories about these individuals. I think it's important to put names with these cases.
Daniel Musterman was a devoted son and a caretaker to his 87-year-old mother who suffered from Alzheimer's. He's in a Walmart parking lot off of Braeswood in the Meyerland area in the middle of a day, goes to his car and actually saw people trying to break in his car, ran over, and was killed. One of the three defendants, now charged in the murder of Daniel Musterman, was out on 5 PR bonds. He had actually forfeited his bonds when he didn't show up in court, and then mysteriously his bonds were reinstated. Daniel Musterman died.
Let me stop you for a second on that case, because one thing that I thought was interesting in the way the city's categorizing crimes is they show crimes against persons and crimes against property. And you would sort of get the impression from that crimes against property are not violent. But first of all, robberies are included in there, but also break into cars are home burglaries. So if you happen to show up while one of these crimes is going on, then obviously it can go sideways in a hurry, just like the case you just described.
And exactly. We've always been of the perspective that burglary is a violent crime waiting to happen. You're just fortunate you weren't home.
And Ray,
at the time
I
it
think you
occurred.
said y'all agree with that.
We do. And, federal judge Lee Rosenthal bought the crap from Rodney Ellis and others who said that these folks are sitting in jail for minor misdemeanors just because they can't pay. That's a bunch of bull. If there's somebody sitting in jail for stealing a pack of hamburger meat, bring me that person's name, and I'll go up to the district attorney's office and tell them how crazy they are to leave that person there. These are people who are breaking into cars, breaking into houses, felons in possession of firearms. Felons in possession of a firearm. We had 344 felons in possession of firearms since Kim Oggs has been elected who have gotten deferred adjudication in Harris County. I challenge you to find any other county where those kind of numbers are out there. When you've got turds out here on the streets who've got maps of Harris County in their car to make sure that they don't go outside of Harris County, because they know if they go outside of Harris County, like north in Montgomery County, they're going to prison, but not in Harris County.
You had a list you were about to read before the break here. So tell us what that analysis you did there.
Let me just tell you that this district attorney believes that burglary of a motor vehicle is nothing. And to prove it, the first 10 who were charged with burglary of a motor vehicle in Harris County, these all got PR bonds, by the way. They all got bonds with no money put out whatsoever. The first one had 4 priors. The second one had 3 priors. The third one had
what kind of priors are they, Ray?
We're talking about robbery. We're talking about failure to ID, theft, unlawfully carrying a handgun, possession of marijuana, bond forfeitures, unlawfully carrying a weapon. The third one had 15 priors. We've got one on here with 18 priors, including multiple drug charges, thefts, burglaries, trespassing, plus 9 others that we couldn't even list on here. 11 priors, 18 priors, 5 priors. Of the top 10, only one had no prior, and I'd venture to say it's probably because he's only 17 and he's just not getting started.
All right,
I'm going to give you just another quick example here.
Give us another couple.
One of the defendants that's charged with the capital murder of Byron Handy was on felony probation. While on probation, he was given 3 separate bonds for offenses all involving the use of a firearm. None of his bonds were revoked, nor was his probation. So think about that, Bill. You're on felony probation. You're charged with 3 felonies involving the use of a firearm. Your probation isn't revoked. None of your bonds are revoked, and now he's got a capital murder charge. The defendant wanted for the murder of Reginald Larry was released on multiple bonds, including murder and 2 aggravated assaults. He was on deferred adjudication while all this occurred. So he's on deferred adjudication, charged with murder and 2 other felonies, and yet was allowed to remain in the community. And now Reginald Larry paid the ultimate price for that. These are some of 25 examples that I highlight.
Let me ask you all this question for a second. Obviously, the setting of bonds, the plea deals, so forth, it's a combination of what the prosecutors are doing and what the judges are doing. Now, if you had to assign responsibility for the situation that you're describing here, is it more the district attorney, or is it more the judges, or you put equal blame, a pox on all their houses? How do y'all look at that?
I will put equal blame on both the district attorney and the judges. However, I will say this, that if this district attorney is true and she says, I'm not doing this, the judges are doing it, she should be out on the steps of the courthouse every single week telling which judges did what to show the kind of abuse that's taking place in Harris County. She's part of it too. Her district attorneys who are outstanding, those assistant district attorneys over there are working their butts off, but they're giving directions on what they have to do. They're making sweetheart deals for folks. Look, listen to this. 96 murders that we looked at, 41 of those suspects had already been handled at least once since Ogg has been in office. 96 people are dead.
Let me ask you this. I've heard Kim say before that part of the problem is that she doesn't have enough people, and so they don't have time to fully prosecute all these cases. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's the case? Or
Well, she's got plenty of people to be doing her campaign stuff, which we recently just saw where she wants them to go out and volunteer on a Monday instead of do work. So, listen, I know she wants more, but if she wants more prosecutors to do more of these sweetheart deals, we're not in favor of that. I wouldn't give her another dime.
But would you be in favor of her having more people to prosecute these cases?
I would be in favor of her having people who are going to enforce the law and not make sweetheart deals with defense attorneys. Yes,
Andy,
what's your view about that issue?
Probably, for the last 6 months, I have seen motion to revoke bonds, and I've seen all the motion to revoke bonds overruled by the felony district court judges. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at this from that perspective on that case. Some of these you got to question why there wasn't a motion to revoke a bond, at least get it on the record. But I would say probably I would lean more of the felony district court judges because that's where the buck stops. Even if a prosecutor doesn't file a motion to revoke on a defendant who's been handled by the same court multiple times on aggravated felonies, the felony district court judge could step up to the plate and say, you know what? Enough is enough. And I'm not seeing that. You were talking earlier about the lack of data around this whole bond bail reform issue. Can you talk about that for just a second? Yeah, one of the questions, and we've done several press conferences on bond reforms, and I continually bring up, we do not know, especially in a data-driven society, how many felony defendants are out on multiple bonds. We don't know what types of offenses. We don't know how many of them are currently wanted and been declared fugitive because they skipped their bond. We don't know how many defendants committed a bond after a motion to revoke the original bond was denied by the district court judge. We don't know how many defendants have actually had their bonds revoked and charged with another crime while out on bond. We don't know how many of our citizens have become victims of crime as a result of offenders violating their bond condition or offenders out on multiple bonds. I would think that those who do support criminal justice bond and bond reform would want to have that data, but we don't. Yeah, of course, both you guys know I'm a real data nerd on all these issues, and it just seems like to me that if we're going to start making significant changes, and I think everybody agrees some changes, we really need to have the data to make sure that these are smart changes and not dumb changes. I encourage you, Bill, to request. I'm gonna start looking into it. Okay, we got to take a quick break here. We'll be right back with more Ray Hunt, Andy Kahan on crime in Houston. Hey, everybody. It's more Common Sense Talk Radio with Bill King. I'm here with Ray Hunt, Houston Police Officers Union, Andy Kahan, Crime Stoppers. And we've been talking about bail reform. And, Ray, you had another point you wanted to make. I had to cut you off. Why don't you come back with it?
Yeah, what Andy was talking about, when you've got a bad judge out there, and we've got some, but listen, they were elected by the people, and the people went in there and punched a button and didn't know who they're electing. But we've got some judges in there that you might have a prosecutor and a defense attorney walk up with a deal, an agreed-to plea bargain, 10 days, 15 days, and you've got a couple activist judges up there in Harris County that'll look at it and say, I think that's too much. And the prosecutors say, well, we're not backing down. They'll say, okay, I'm dismissing the charge for lack of probable cause. That is taking place right now in Harris County on a regular basis. Further, when someone doesn't show up on a PR bond, instead of saying that they didn't show up, they're simply resetting it with the person not even being there, which makes their stats show that these people on PR bonds actually are showing up to court when they're not.
Oh, wow. So let me ask you this question. We've got an election coming up here pretty soon. Is HPOU going to put out a list of judges that they think need to be taken off the bench?
We before the election at hpou.org, we list all of our endorsements on there, and we do our best to do our homework on each one of these judges to see which ones are fair, which ones are not fair. And listen, just because they don't side with us doesn't mean that they're not a fair judge. We're just asking for persons to be fair, not for them to be activists, and that's what we have right now in Harris County. And
that list of judges will be available on y'all's website. How would people go about finding out who the police think we need to?
hpou.org are all of our endorsements each time before the election.
Okay, great. Andy, I want to come back. You were talking off the air here about the parole system and problems that exist in the parole system, which I'd never heard about. And that's your background. You were a parole officer for many years.
I was a parole officer. I was a hearing officer with the parole board many moons ago. And I'll give you an example probably everybody that is listening will definitely recall, and that's Harris County Deputy Dollywall, who was murdered, pulled over a guy in a traffic stop. This particular offender did 10 years of a 20-year sentence for aggravated assault and aggravated kidnapping. While on parole, he was convicted of DWI. He was not returned to prison. His parole was not revoked. And then he actually was a fugitive for 3 years. Nobody knew it. He was one of 6,000 parolees annually in the state of Texas who are convicted of new offenses while on parole but are not returned to prison, and they are not counted statistically as a repeat offender even though they were convicted of a new crime while out on parole. Another high-profile case.
I'm going to just make sure that sinks in for a second. 6,000 every year are people that are out on parole, commit another crime, convicted of another crime, and don't have to go back to prison.
Correct.
Now, how's that possible?
That's why I have no hair, because my favorite saying is criminal justice and logic are often oxymoronic terms that have difficult times meeting each other. I was always been of the opinion if you're on parole and you got a new conviction, you've pretty much demonstrated you shouldn't be in the community and you should go back to prison. But that's not happening. There's been 5 people in Harris County the last few years who've been murdered by offenders on parole who were convicted of new crimes but not returned to prison. And this is just what I am noticing. Who knows how many others are out there. And that's another troubling public safety issue that's quite frankly being ignored.
And very similar to the whole bail issue, yeah. All right, listen, I want to lay that aside for a second. And, Ray, I want to talk about police reform a little bit, because there's a lot of discussion about that going on, obviously, in the wake of the George Floyd case. And I think we all can look at that videotape and say, it's just hard to even watch and understand how somebody could be that could lack such empathy for another human being. It's hard to understand. And we now have defund the police, and that's kind of a fringe deal. Nobody's going to vote for that. But I think that we do need to be thinking about police reform. And so, what if from the police officers union? What are the things that you all think need to be done? What are things that y'all are prepared to do to respond to these kinds of community concerns?
Well, first of all, you're right about the defund the police is nothing but the folks talking about that are the children of the corn. They're not the people who are really wanting reform. Those people want no government whatsoever. What we're in favor of is we would love to have a national response to resistance, a national de-escalation training. Any training that you want to provide to our police officers to make them better police officers, we want that. We have no problem with the mayor's executive orders that he introduced, as we never had in our policy that said no. We never had something that said no chokeholds. Now everybody knows there are no chokeholds. His no-knock warrants, that's brand new. He says, and now it has to be approved by the chief of police before you can do a no-knock warrant. I don't have major heartburn with that. I've never been a big fan of them, except in situations with a hostage situation where you're scared that this person is going to kill somebody. But as far as the duty to intercede, we've always done that. However, our officers need to know you do have a requirement that you must intercede if you see somebody who's gone too far. And this may not be somebody who's intentionally trying to violate someone's rights, but someone who just got slapped in the face by a suspect, takes off running, and that officer catches them just like anybody else. You're pissed off. Mm-hmm. So maybe you've got to sit there and grab that person and say, hey, let me take your prisoner. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of stuff that we need for duty to intercede. We don't have any problems with those things. This mayor, I want to compliment this mayor and council, because I'll tell you what, right after this incident happened and you've got all these people talking about defunding the police, this mayor and this council fully funded our police department in their budget and gave us 5 classes. Now, whether or not we're going to be able to fill those classes now, I doubt, because I believe that our applications right now are down like 64% nationwide to become a police officer. Who in the hell wants to become a police officer today? Mm-hmm. It's because of that 5% out there that's making all the noise. It's not the 95% of citizens who support us, who are coming up to us at restaurants and buying our meals, who are walking up saying thank you for your service. Those are the people that we know are the silent majority. It's not those 5% that are talking about defunding police.
Right. Let me ask you this question. Just as a police officer who's worked the beat and stuff, can you give any explanation of what happened up in Minneapolis in the George Floyd case? What was going through that officer's mind? I mean, you have any insight to that at all?
I don't, but I can tell you this, that on every incident that we see on camera, you will have officers, 50% will say, I can justify it because of this, or they'll say, I understand that I probably wouldn't have done that, but I don't think you did anything wrong. I haven't had one person tell me that they believed it was appropriate for that officer to have his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. But what's sad is that officer is not standing on those lines right now trying to keep violence down. Yeah. It's the other people who are just as sick about it as everybody else is, that are out there having to be spit on by these 5%, rocks thrown at them, smoke blown underneath their shields and that kind of stuff, and they have to sit there and take it. That's really sad for our police officers today to have to do that, and that's probably why your applications are down and going to continue to go down.
Well, and I mean, it seems like to me from the police officer standpoint, y'all want to weed out the bad apples because of the effect it has on you and your interaction with the public.
We've got somewhere between 1% and 5% of bad apples, just like radio talk show hosts, just like lawyers, just like priests, just like anybody else. We do not want bad apples at the Houston Police Department, and many, many times those persons, even by people in our union, are voted to be terminated from the department. So anybody who tells you that we have a code of silence, that's a bunch of crap. Just to give you the stats on that, we had about 1,000 complaints last year. Only 270 came from citizens. The rest came from officers on officers. Mm-hmm. So anybody who tells you that internal affairs sweeps things under the rug, never been investigated by internal affairs, or that we have a thin blue line, absolutely untrue when it comes to a code of silence. That's just a bunch of bull.
I actually, I don't know if you know, I've ever talked about this, but I sat on 2 grand juries that investigated officer shootings. And there was a narrative in the press and the media about what had happened. And in one of the cases, there was actually live video feed from the apartment complex cameras, and they were able to stitch them together so we saw the entire thing. And it was ironically, it was 2 African-American officers, and they were chasing a Hispanic suspect. And it was a teenage kid, and the story was he got shot in the back. Well, when you see the video, he's actually running through the apartment complex with a gun in his hand, and he turns towards the officer, and the officer discharges 1 round, which hits in the stucco. You can see it splash behind, and the kid panics because of the gunfire, and he turns, and just as he turns, the second round goes off, and it catches him kind of through the back shoulder. But that became a story in the paper that he was shot in the back.
And I'm sure it then came up and said, and it's been ruled a homicide. Of course, every police shooting when the person's killed is a homicide. Every single one. Yeah. And let me tell you that when the suspect's running from police and they're armed and they're putting their hand back, shooting back at you, they're probably going to get shot in the back. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's not justified. It's completely justified if that person is shooting at police officers.
Yeah. By the way, I went out. We know Bill, that officer, and I went out and talked to him afterwards. He was shattered. I would be amazed if he's in law enforcement today. And I hear that quite frequently officers that are involved in citizen shooting end up leaving the force. Is that
leaving the force? Alcoholism, divorce, suicide, all those things. No one wants to get involved in a shooting. Yeah. And thankfully, we don't. With 2 million contacts a year, we had 21 shootings last year. 21. That's not killings. That means officers discharged 21 times. This year, we've discharged 9 times since January. Those numbers are always under 20.
All right, well, let me come back in just a minute. We're going to do a quick break. I want to talk some more about training and how we handle stress situations for police officers. This is Bill King, Common Sense Talk Radio. We're right back with more crime in Houston. Hey, Houston, this is Bill King back with more Common Sense Talk Radio, KPRC AM 950. We're here with Ray Hunt from the Police Union, and we're here from Andy Kahan from Crime Stoppers, and we're talking about crime in Houston, and we're talking right now about police reform, Ray. And I want to bring up the issue about body cam footage. A lot of the controversy around the country about these the video not being released or not being released timely. And first of all, tell me what the union's position is on releasing body cam footage.
We want it released as quickly as possible, unless it's going to be just completely embarrassing to the family of the person who's been injured. But we want it released as quickly as possible. I know that goes against our department. Our department and the district attorney do not want it released because they talk about tainting the jury pool and that they then have to move the case elsewhere. And I say that I'd rather taint the jury pool than have our officers ridiculed out there and had things thrown at them because they think that we're trying to hide something. Yeah. Get it out there, let people see it, and it's what it is.
Okay, Andy, but you were telling me over the break it's a little more complicated. Some of the issues about
we had a situation in Harris County in which we had a 3-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl that was murdered. The person was convicted and executed. Several people got a copy of the police report and crime scene photos, totally legal. But what they did next was really tick me off. They plastered the pictures of a 3-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl who was nude from the waist up all over their websites. And I just said, this isn't right. So we actually got a bill passed, and you'll probably be surprised who was the sponsor of the bill, and that was Senator Rodney Ellis. So Senator Rodney Ellis pushed forth a bill that basically reduced public access to crime scene photos and crime scene video without, in other words, you have to have consent of the victim's family, and you have to have a court order to reproduce. So on the same lines, what we're seeing right now with the police officer shooting, you have situations that could be potentially embarrassing, or for a family who perhaps doesn't want their loved one's last moments being splattered all over for the world to see, and there is no such thing as delete. Once it's out there, it's out there. So I would be cautious with releasing tapes.
So it's a little more complicated than it seems at first blush. Although
it is.
It does, Ray, put an officer who, if he thinks that the video exonerates him or her, puts them in a difficult situation if the family has control over releasing the tape.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they have control over it. And the ones that the recent shootings that we had, I believe that the chief showed 7 of the 8 the videos, and 7 of them said we don't want it released. And that's fine as long as the citizens are then willing to stand up there and say, we've looked at this and we don't want it released. But if they start saying things that are contrary to what the video shows,
making accusations,
the department has to release it. It's only fair to the officer. The officer does not need to be have people marching at his house and following him home and those kind of things.
If there's something that exonerates him.
Absolutely, it should be released.
Ray, let me ask you about the narcotics division and this terrible episode we had over in the East End where 2 citizens were shot in a raid. Of course, first of all, you got the no-knock warrant, which I think that kind of brought to light how dangerous those really are, both for citizens and the police officers. And I know we have, I guess the chief had announced he was going to require some new internal, and I think Turner's executive order may have touched on this as well. Is that something we need to codify? And tell us just how y'all think about no-knock raids these days.
Well, like I say, I've never been a big fan of no-knock warrants. I think they're extremely dangerous, but there's also a time that they should be used, especially, like I said earlier, in kidnapping situations where someone's life is in danger. If you knock on the door and say, we're about to kick it in, and they execute the victim. But no-knock warrants right now under the executive order have to be approved by the chief of police. We have no problem with that whatsoever.
And can municipal judges still sign, or do they change that? It has to be a district judge. Because I know in that particular case, it was a municipal judge that was officing right across the hall from the officer, and just that seemed like a terrible idea of having that sort of proximity when you're talking about such an incredibly intrusive invasion of somebody's home.
Yeah, that case has gotten a lot of attention, and it's very, very unfortunate for the outstanding officers who were on that scene that had nothing to do with the fraudulent warrant. They had no idea their person was not telling them the truth. It would be no different than you and I both being police officers and you saying, "Hey, Ray, can you help me go run this warrant?" And you show me the warrant, and I see that it's a good warrant, and I go in there and do something and find out that you lied in order to obtain that warrant. It's very unfair that these other officers are facing the brunt of criticism that they're getting when they did absolutely nothing wrong except for believe another officer.
Yeah, I can understand that. I guess what I have a harder time understanding is how this particular officer. I mean, it appears that he was rogue for a long time. I mean, this was not his first rodeo, and it just from someone who's managed businesses. It makes me question what kind of internal controls are there? What kind of management structures are in place to supervise? I mean, when we give a police officer the power to do the sort of things that Goins was doing, it's a lot of power, and there needs to be some checks on that. And so I know there's been an investigation in the Narcotics Division. I don't think that's been released yet.
It's an audit, yep.
Yeah, and
hasn't been released. I know the chief said that he's ready to release it. We have no problems with him releasing that as long as any active investigation is redacted. We don't want anybody put in jeopardy. We have some cases that we work with the feds that sometimes they might be a 2-3 year case where it's an ongoing case. So if you've got somebody out there who's still working an undercover case, that should be redacted. But all the other information in there is fair game. It's public information. It should be, and they should release the audit with the redactions for the to protect the identity of the undercover agents.
But do you agree that we appear to need better internal controls? Oh, and narcotics is always a problematic area of every police department, I think.
I definitely believe that when you're dealing with narcotics, you're dealing with money, paying informants, those kind of things. That there have to be some very, very strict controls, and clearly that doesn't appear to have been the case whenever this was taking place. So we're completely in favor of doing everything we can to regain the public's trust in that area, and we're going to do whatever they tell us to do or not to do in the future.
Okay, let me turn to a topic that is something you and I have been talking about for at least a couple of decades. One of the reforms that y'all have discussed is having 2 officers in a police car, which is something that I've supported for about 20 years, I think. I wrote an op-ed on it back when I was at the Houston Chronicle. But I want you to start out and tell why you think that fits into the police reform agenda.
For me, it's a no-brainer. Anybody who thinks that one brain's better than 2 or 2 hands are better than 4 has never done police work. I believe that when you have two-person units, that we call them now, I had a partner almost the entire 18 years I was on the streets, and you're more likely to go hands-on whenever you've got a partner there with you. If you've got somebody bigger than you are and you're by yourself on a scene, you tell that person to stop, and he starts coming at you, you have very little options except to say that I'm assuming he's coming to get my gun. Why else would he be coming at me whenever I've told him to stop and I've got my gun in my hand? Mm-hmm. So if you've got a second person there, that person can use a less than lethal force. That person can use a taser. That person may be able to use some other type of technique that doesn't require deadly force. You're more likely to do that when you got a second person there. It's common sense. Our vehicles are designed for 2 persons. You can't have an officer trying to operate that computer in the car while they're going code 1 to a robbery in progress, and supplements are coming across that computer screen, and he's having to read to see what they are and watch traffic while he's doing 65 miles an hour. It's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, many chiefs, because of the fact that it's more economical to have one person in a vehicle, you can run more calls, get response times down. Fortunately, our assistant chiefs and our chief have said if persons want to ride 2-man, they're going to be allowed to ride 2-person units, and I'm hoping that becomes the standard. It should be the standard. Mm-hmm. It should be 2-person units. It should not be one person out there trying to do an aggravated call by themselves.
Well, I think also the point that you were making earlier, which is if somebody's having a problem and they're losing their temper with somebody that they've accosted, then you've got somebody there that might be able to de-escalate the situation, which makes perfectly good sense to me.
Our vice president gives a story all the time about a guy who they were on a scene and he's wrestling with this guy, and the guy bites his partner on the neck and literally draws the blood. And the guy takes off running, and that partner's going at him, and he is going to do some serious damage when he catches up to him because he's been bit on the neck. And that other officer grabs him and says, "Let me handle this." That's exactly what the responsibility to intercede in the mayor's executive order. That's what we're talking about. You can't intercede if you're by yourself.
Yeah, if you don't have anybody there to intercede, you can't do it. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a great show. I can't believe that an hour has already gone back. I want to get a commitment from both of you to come back sometime in the fall. Maybe, Ray, we can come back and y'all can go through your list of judicial recommendations.
That'd be great.
And try to deal with this issue and also see how these crime numbers change after we get past the COVID pandemic. Folks, I'm going to take off next week for the 4th of July weekend, but we're going to do the rerun of the Dan Crenshaw interview that ran last week. I know a lot of y'all listened to that last week. I think we had 43,000 people or something on Facebook Live listening to it. It was a great interview. I'd encourage you to come back and hear what Dan had to say because he had some very interesting perspectives. He's got a big youth rally coming up here on July 13th, I guess it is. What's that? September 13th, yeah, and he's done a great job of reaching out to young people and making the conservative case. So anyway, we'll see you in 2 weeks back here, Common Sense Talk Radio, KPRC, AM 950. Ray and Andy, thank you so much for coming in today. See you guys next week.